Good day to all, and a very warm welcome. We're going to just lay down again. I think for hopefully one of the last times I put this down here in a video like this. We're going to talk about one of Paul's references here to what might seem to be an historical Christ. And it is in Galatians 4:4. It reads, when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his son, born of a woman, or having come from a woman, more appropriately, having come under the law. So Paul's Greek here uses genomenon, from genomai, I think, genomai, rather than genau or genetheta, from again genau, which is the normal verb meaning to be born and to beget. This is not a trivial difference. The word the word he uses broadly means to become, to happen, to appear, or to come into being, to be built, to be constructed. Okay, it carries no necessary biological implication. Hence, Paul's phrase literally reads, having come to be from a woman, or idiomatically, having appeared as human. Okay, it marks entry into the human condition, not necessarily a physical birth. You might know where I'm going here. The semantic distinction here, then, I get these confused sometimes. So genomai, or genomenon, to become, to come to being, to appear, denotes manifestation or assumption, or the assumption into a state or of a state, having become in the likeness of men. Genomai means to beget, to give birth to. Okay, literal biological birth. So the woman born of the man or Jesus born of a woman, this literal birth expression is not there in Paul. Is actually not. It's not what Paul says. Technical, but this is actually what he says: to become from a woman, like to be manifested, if you like, from a woman. Now you might think that still means the same thing, but hold on a moment. Paul consistently employs this genomai for Christ coming into human existence, never genau, which the rest of the New Testament uses for literal birth. This lexical pattern is deliberate and may well be meaningful for Paul. So Romans 1:3, he uses this same word here, who came or became from the seed of David according to the flesh, right? And this is, again, probably an interpolation into Romans. Philippians 2:7, having become in the likeness of men, describing assumption of a human form, not physical conception. 2 Corinthians 5:21, he made him to be sin who knew no sin. So again, Paul's language concerns becoming or entering into a human condition, not a physical birth. These examples reveal Paul's stylistic preference when speaking of transformation or divine manifestation. He uses genomai rather than genau. When Paul uses genau, the literal, there are different ways to write this. So in certain, I think, translations, you get a slightly different, the root is the same, but the way it is put on paper is slightly different sometimes. So Paul uses the biological verb genau in several places where he discusses literal human birth, including Romans 9:11. So for though the twins were not yet born and had done nothing good or bad. So he uses this born word for a biological birth. Never for Jesus. Galatians 4:23 to 29, the allegory of Hagar and Sarah. In the same chapter, one of the slave women was born according to the flesh. Right? The one of the slave women was born according to the flesh. The one of the free woman through the promise. So even here, in Hagar, he believes, obviously, was born. Hagar here is used as a metaphor in this chapter, but Hagar was in the Old Testament. She was born according to the flesh, right? And he uses the correct biological marker, the word here meaning for a biological birth. So 1 Corinthians 4:15. Now he, in Christ Jesus, I begot you through the gospel. Again, was born through, though metaphorical, he still uses this born for the concept of begetting, different than the one in Galatians 4:4. Again, Philemon 10, whom I have begotten in my imprisonment. Another metaphorical use for this word genau. But Paul therefore knew both verbs and chose them carefully. Genau when he meant generative birth, genomai when he meant existential becoming. His choice in Galatians 4:4 is thus theologically charged and not casual. The allegorical and theological meaning here. So the theological contrast in Galatians 4 here, Paul deliberately distinguishes between human and divine origins using two different verbs within the same chapter. In verse 23 to 20, in verses 23 to 29, he uses genau for literal childbirth of Ishmael and Isaac, the one born according to the flesh and the one born through the promise. Yet in verse 4, when referring to Christ, he switches and uses this word, having come to be of a woman. This choice emphasizes divine manifestation rather than human procreation. Christ's entry through a woman inaugurates the covenant of promise, contrasting with the natural births representing the old covenant of the flesh. Paul's distinction here and Paul's diction fits his cosmic theology. The Son is sent forth by God, appearing within the human realm. The phrase of a woman mirrors Hebrew idioms like in Job 14:1. Man born of a woman is of few days and full of trouble. In the idiom born of a woman simply means a human being. Paul likely employs the phrase in this broader anthropological sense. His Christology elsewhere is entirely celestial and redemptive. Paul's Jesus is never linked to Mary or Joseph. He has no childhood, hometown or family in Paul. Remember, in all of his letters, appears as a pre-existent divine being sent into human likeness. In all of his letters, also certainly all 7 and most of the 13. His Christology elsewhere is entirely the woman phrase therefore functions allegorically, a poetic affirmation that the divine Son entered moral existence, not a statement of a literal birth. So scholarly consensus here. Leading critical scholars recognize this nuance. James D.G. Dunn, the participle, let's get on my, it's in Greek here, need not imply human birth. Genomina, imply human birth. It denotes Christ's entry into the human sphere. Joseph Fitzmyer, the participle conveys having come, not having been born. Bar Ehrman again, Paul's phrase may mean only that Christ became human. It tells nothing of a biological birth. And Bar Ehrman believes that there was a Jesus, but still he acknowledges this. N.T. Wright, Orthodox, concedes Paul offers no birth narrative, leaving the phrase open to idiomatic readings. And there's an addendum here. Having become human and being born from Mary, is not really there. He never mentions Mary. He never mentions Joseph. Now, the addendum here is quite interesting, very important. The addendum, so the Marcionite text. Even this linguistic distinction may be moot in the case of Marcion's earlier recension of Galatians. The line born of a woman born under the law, Galatians 4:4, is absent from Marcion's version of the epistle as reported by Tertullian, and it verses Marcion 5:4 and Epiphanius the Panarion 42 and 42:11. This means that in Marcion's earliest Gospel Pauline corpus, the phrase "born of a woman" never appears at all. Let that sink in. Further weakening any argument that Paul intended a literal or biographical reference to Jesus' birth. Even if the canonical wording implies incarnation, Marcion's text shows that some 2nd century Christians read Galatians without it. So here, this is really interesting here. Tertullian versus Marcionem 5423. I'm going to read this to you. And around 207 CE, this was written. Here too, where he says God sent forth his son, made of a woman, made under the law, Marcion contends that the phrase "made of a woman" was inserted by others, so that it should not be believed that he was truly born. Epiphanius Panarion 42:11 7-8. This is 375 CE, and this is still going around a lot. And in the epistle to the Galatians, Marcion cut out the words "made of a woman, made under the law," saying that Christ was not born of a woman, but descended from heaven. Both fathers confirm that Marcion's Galatians lacked this phrase, and that he explained its absence by teaching Christ who descended directly from heaven, rather than being born of Mary. Now, Marcion's Gospel is probably the earliest. Been through this, and lots of people now say modern scholarship increasingly views Marcion's Apostolicon, the collection of Paul's letters here, as preserving an earlier textual form of Galatians rather than a later mutilation. Researchers such as Adolf von Harnack, Jason Badoon, and Marcus Vincent argue that Galatians was original to Marcion's corpus, not a later Catholic adoption. This means Marcion's shorter version, lacking "born of a woman, born under the law," could represent an earlier Pauline archetype, with a longer canonical form reflecting subsequent theological editing to align Paul with developing incarnation doctrines, not a later... A shorter version lacking "born of a woman, born under the law." So, interesting, huh? Paul uses the literal verb to be born only a few times in Galatians, Hagar and Sarah allegory. Corinthians, "I begot you through the gospel," and Philemon, so we've been through this. None of these refer to Jesus, and all are either literal human births or metaphorical. Okay, when so it's cool. And by contrast, when Paul speaks of Christ entering the world, he switches, as in Galatians 4:4, 1-3 here, Philippians 2-7, Romans 15:8. So very quickly, I want to show you again, this is important. Stay till the end if you're interested. This is important. Tertullian's late citation of Galatians 4:4. Okay, so Tertullian's earlier middle works, Apologetium de Carne Christi and Versus Judaeos, make no mention of Galatians 4:4. Even when discussing Christ's incarnation, these verses appear only once in the Adversus Marcionem 5:4, written around... this verse appears only once, written around 207, where he accuses Marcion of removing it. He's lying. This latent polemical appearance suggests that the phrase here, "born of a woman, born under the law," may not have been part of the Galatians text in wider circulation prior to the anti-Marcionite controversies. Okay, and he does this as well with the brother. It's strange, he's done this twice. It appears under Tertullian, I think. The brother of the Lord element here is absent in his earlier works, where he's specifically trying to prove Jesus' earthly existence, and then it appears later on. Is he the interpolator or someone under him? Because, and I've showed this in another one of my videos here, he's not referring to them, and then suddenly later on he does. Is he the guy that's putting these interpolations, in these small interpolations into essentially the text of Paul now, because the earlier Pauline literature didn't contain only the handful of these vague references, even them, to an historical Jesus. I think there might be very well a reason to forward that thesis. In sum, linguistically, the canonical text already implies manifestation rather than biological birth. Textually, Marcion's earlier form removes even that phrase. Together they point to a Paul who envisioned a divine son appearing among humans, not one literally born of Mary. All right. Interesting, huh?